Pick up a claw hammer built before 1923, and somewhere on it there is a joint, a steel head wedged down onto a wooden handle, locked in place by a thin metal shim driven into the end grain. That joint is the weakest part of the whole tool. Wood dries, wood shrinks. The head works a little looser with every swing, and then one afternoon in the middle of a stroke, it lets go and flies across the room. Anyone who framed houses in the early 20th century knew that sound and knew that danger. The hammer was the oldest tool on the site and still the one most likely to fail. A Swedish immigrant working out of a basement in Rockford, Illinois, decided the problem was the joint itself, and his answer was to remove it. He would forge the head and the handle of a hammer out of a single bar of steel, one continuous piece, with nothing to wedge, nothing to glue, and nothing to come apart. The tool he built more than 100 years ago is still made today in the same city by the same method, and it still carries his name. Estwing. For most of the history of the trade, a hammer was two materials pretending to be one. The head did the work, the handle absorbed the shock, and the only thing holding them together was friction and a wedge. Hickory was the standard handle wood because it was tough and springy, but even good hickory split. A handle that took a glancing blow on a nail could crack along the grain. A handle left in a hot truck would dry out and loosen. Carpenters carried spare handles the way they carried spare blades, and rehanging a head was a routine evening chore. The industry had accepted the broken handle as a permanent cost of doing business. It had been that way since the Bronze Age. Ernest Otto Estwing was born on the island of Öland, off the southeast coast of Sweden, in 1885. He left for the United States at 16, part of the wave of Swedish immigrants who filled the factory towns of the upper Midwest in the early 1900s. He settled in Rockford, a manufacturing city about 90 miles northwest of Chicago that already held one of the largest Swedish populations in America. He spoke no English when he arrived. He enrolled in night school to learn the language and to train as a machinist, working through the day and studying after dark. Before we get into how the modern hammer is actually built, if you appreciate stories about the companies that made things the right way and stuck around, take a second to subscribe. It is the one thing that tells us to keep digging these up. He had a mechanical mind and very little patience for the idea that something could not be improved. At 21, he married Hulda Svensson and moved east, where he found work that sharpened his engineering instincts. He repaired typewriters for Remington, precise mechanical devices with hundreds of small moving parts. He worked as an industrial engineer for a manufacturing company in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He filed patents on his own inventions in his spare time, including a self-loading shotgun. When Hulda grew homesick for her family, the couple packed up and moved back to Rockford in 1918. Back home, Estwing kept inventing. He used a hammer constantly in his own work, and he kept running into the same two faults that every tradesman lived with. The wooden handle failed, and the rigid wooden handle drove the full shock of every blow straight into the wrist and the elbow. Men who swung a hammer all day developed chronic tendinitis. The tool was hurting the people who depended on it. Estwing worked the problem in his basement and arrived at an answer that sounds obvious now and sounded reckless then. Make the entire tool out of steel head and handle together, forged as one piece. The obvious objection was weight and shock. A solid steel handle would be heavier than wood and would ring like a tuning fork every time it hit a nail. Estwing solved the first part with the forging itself. By drop forging the tool from a single bar and shaping the handle for strength rather than bulk, he produced a hammer that was strong without being heavy, well balanced, and in his own patent language, substantially unbreakable. The shock problem he solved separately, with the grip, and that solution would become almost as famous as the hammer. Estwing filed his patent application for the one-piece drop-forged striking tool on July 17, 1924. The original patent, number 1,578,502, was granted on March 30, 1926, and reissued the following year. The claims covered axes, hammers, and hatchets, in which the head and handle were drop forged in one piece and heat treated so that the most strength came with the least weight. He had already started building. In 1923, he opened the Estwing Manufacturing Company in Rockford and became the first company anywhere to make and sell hammers forged from a single piece of solid steel. The early going was slow. A solid steel hammer cost more than a wooden one, and most buyers had never seen anything like it. The turn came in 1925, when Estwing placed an advertisement in a trade journal read by union carpenters. The orders that came back surprised him. Carpenters were exactly the buyers who lost the most time and money to broken handles, and they understood at a glance what a hammer that could not come apart was worth. The response was strong enough to attract investors and to let Estwing open his first real factory. The basement operation became a company. What spread the hammer after that was not advertising so much as the tool itself. A carpenter who bought one and ran it for a year without rehanging a head told the other men on the crew. The Estwing got passed around job sites, borrowed, weighed in the hand, and bought. It was the kind of product that sold itself once it was in front of the right buyer, because the right buyer had spent his whole career fighting the exact failure the tool eliminated. The grip came next, and it answered the shock problem the steel handle had created. Estwing built it out of leather. He cut leather into rings, stacked them tight over the steel shank of the handle, and compressed the whole stack between a shoulder forged into the steel and a steel end cap, locked down with rivets. He patented the handle design separately, filing in 1926 and receiving the patent in 1929. The stacked leather did two jobs. It gave the hand a warm, grippable surface instead of bare metal, and it soaked up a real share of the vibration that traveled up the handle on impact. The leather grip became the signature of the brand. Anyone who has held one remembers the look, dark rings of polished leather banded together into a handle, and the way the surface darkens and burnishes with years of use. It was practical and it was handsome at the same time, which is a rare pairing in a hand tool. The construction also meant the grip could be rebuilt. When the leather finally wears out after decades, the rivets can be cut, the rings replaced, and the handle varnished and riveted again. A leather Estwing is one of the few tools designed to outlive its own grip and then take a new one. The company grew through the late 1920s and then ran straight into the Great Depression. Hammer sales tracked construction, and construction in the 1930s nearly stopped. Many small Rockford manufacturers closed their doors. Estwing's growth stalled, but the company stayed open, and the way it stayed open became part of how people in Rockford talked about it for decades afterward. Ernest and his managers went out of their way to soften the blow on their workers and their families, holding on to people through years when there was barely enough work to justify it. In a city built on factory labor, that reputation mattered. It bought loyalty that lasted generations. The Second World War changed the company's footing. Steel was rationed and controlled, and most consumer tool production was shut down to free up metal for the war. The War Production Board, the federal agency that decided who got steel and who did not, classified Estwing's tools as essential to the war effort and let the company keep forging while competitors went idle. Hammers, axes, and pry bars went to shipyards, construction battalions, and factories running around the clock. When the war ended, Estwing came out of it with its workforce intact and announced plans to expand the plant rather than shrink it. The post-war building boom put an Estwing in a great many hands. America was throwing up houses faster than at any point in its history, and the framing crews driving that construction wanted a hammer that could keep the pace without quitting on them. The solid steel head held its temper through millions of strikes. The claws pulled bent nails without bending themselves. Roofers, masons, and wrecking crews found the same thing the carpenters had already learned, that a tool with no joint to fail was a tool that stopped costing them downtime. Estwing widened the line to match, forging heads in different weights and shapes for different trades, but the construction underneath never changed from one job to the next. The hammer that framed a house and the hammer that set brick were the same idea wearing a different head. The next big change came in the 1950s with a new grip. Leather was traditional and beloved, but it had limits. It could absorb water, it needed care, and it was slow to build by hand. Estwing developed a blue vinyl grip molded directly onto the steel shank. The key word was molded. Cheaper hammers slid a rubber sleeve over the handle, and the sleeve would eventually spin or work its way off. Estwing poured a liquid compound into a cast, set the steel forging into it, and bonded the grip permanently to the metal. The recipe was a closely held secret. The result was a grip that would not come off the handle any more than the head would come off the hammer. Somewhere along the way, the company found a second audience it had never gone looking for. Geologists discovered the Estwing rock pick. A geologist in the field needs a tool that can chip, pry, split, and pulverize rock for hours without breaking. And the one-piece steel construction was built for exactly that punishment. A wooden-handled rock hammer would not survive a season. The Estwing pick, with its pointed tip or chisel edge and its leather or blue grip, became standard kit for field geology around the world. To this day, the blue-gripped Estwing is so common in the profession that it works almost as a badge. That reputation reached its strangest peak in the 1960s. When NASA trained the Apollo astronauts for the moon, it sent test pilots into the American Southwest to learn field geology, because collecting rock samples was one of the main scientific jobs waiting for them on the lunar surface. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin spent days in places like the Grand Canyon and the West Texas desert learning to read and sample rock. In photographs from that training, Armstrong is holding an Estwing rock hammer. The same one-piece tool a Rockford machinist designed for carpenters and rockhounds was in the hands of the first man who would walk on the moon while he practiced for the trip. The way an Estwing is built has changed less than almost anything else about the company. The principle is still the one Ernest patented in the 1920s. Every hammer starts as a bar of steel. Today, the steel comes from Nucor, an American mill in Nebraska, and the specification is held tight because the whole promise of the tool depends on the metal behaving the same way every time. The bar is heated until it glows orange and then drop forged, slammed into the rough shape of the tool under enormous pressure so that the head and the handle are squeezed out of the same continuous piece. Forging is not casting. The steel is never poured, it is pounded, and the pounding lines up the internal grain of the metal along the shape of the tool. A finished Estwing carries that grain flowing in unbroken lines from the striking face down through the neck and into the handle, with no seam, no weld, and no joint anywhere along its length. That unbroken grain is the whole reason the tool does not fail. A two-piece hammer has a built-in fault line where the head meets the handle. A one-piece Estwing has no fault line to find. After forging, the tool is heat-treated to bring the steel to the right hardness, hard enough to take impact for decades without deforming, not so hard that it turns brittle and cracks. The plant moves the glowing forgings through the early stages with robots now, because a piece of steel at forging temperature is dangerous to handle and the timing has to be exact. The face and the claws are ground and polished, and much of the finishing is still done by hand, with workers taking each tool to belt sanders to bring it to its final shape and shine. The leather grips are still built the original way, leather rings pressed onto the shank by hand and locked down under a riveted cap. None of that automation changed the design. It changed the consistency. Estwing added close to 70 robots to its Rockford plant in recent years to handle the hot and repetitive stages, but the tool coming off the line is the same tool in every dimension that mattered to Ernest. The robots make more of them, more alike. They do not make a different hammer. The shock problem. Estwing, first attacked with stacked leather in the 1920s, never fully went away, and the company kept working on it. In 2001, it introduced and patented a new grip it called the shock reduction grip, the molded idea taken further, engineered specifically to cut the vibration that travels into the hand on every strike. The company says it removes a large share of that shock. And for someone driving nails for 10 hours, it is the difference between finishing the day with a sore arm and finishing a career on the way to surgery. Workers' compensation boards treated heavy hammer use as a real injury risk, with tendinitis and carpal tunnel running through the trades. The grip that cut vibration was not a luxury. It kept people working. The injuries Ernest noticed in the 1910s were the same injuries the 2001 grip was built to prevent, which means the company had been solving one version of that problem for nearly 80 years. The product line widened over the decades well beyond the framing hammer. Estwing makes claw hammers and rip hammers, ball peen and brick hammers, drilling hammers and sledges. It makes axes and hatchets, including camp axes that look almost exactly like the ones it sold in the 1920s. It makes the Geologists picks that put it in the field and at the moon training sites, pry bars for demolition, roofing and flooring tools, tomahawks, and double-bit axes. More recently, it added a titanium hammer, lighter than steel for the same swing, aimed at professionals who want to spare their arms without giving up durability. The catalog runs to dozens of hammers alone. Every one of them starts the same way, as a single bar of steel. The hard part of the story is not the forging, it is survival. Rockford built its economy on metalworking and earned the nickname "screw capital of the world" for its fastener industry, and in the late 20th century, that economy came apart. The recession of the early 1980s hit the city about as hard as anywhere in the country. Factory after factory moved production overseas, chasing labor that cost a fraction of American wages. Rockford spent years near the top of the national unemployment lists. The cheap imported hammer, stamped out abroad and sold for a few dollars, flooded every hardware aisle in America. Estwing did not chase the bottom. A cheap hammer with a slip-on sleeve and a forgettable head could always be sold for less than an Estwing, and Estwing let it. The bet was the same bet the company made in 1923. A professional who swings a hammer every working day, a framer, a roofer, a mason, will pay more for a tool that does not fail and does not punish the hand, because over the life of the tool, it turns out to be the cheaper choice. Contractors call the line the Cadillac of hammers. An Estwing on a worker's belt is a fair sign that the worker knows the trade. The tools last so long that the company offers a lifetime guarantee without flinching, and customers routinely report using the same hammer for 25 years and refusing to buy another. A hammer that gets handed from a father to a son is not a sale the company will ever make twice, and Estwing built its whole business on being that hammer anyway. There is a detail collectors love. For the first few decades, Estwing forged the date of manufacture right into the steel of the handle shank. Under the grip, raised numbers formed in the forging rather than stamped on afterward. People restoring old Estwings have peeled back the leather washers and read the birth date of a hammer made in 1948 or 1953 or 1986, the digits still legible under decades of grime. Those hammers are still working. A tool that records its own birthday and then outlives the man who bought it is a different kind of object than the throwaway hammer in the discount bin. It is the difference Ernest was selling from the start. The wider American tool industry did not stay independent. Over the same century, nearly every famous American hand tool name was bought, merged, and folded into a larger corporation, and the brands that competed for the carpenter's dollar in 1950 mostly answer now to a handful of conglomerates. Estwing did not. It was never absorbed, never flipped to a private equity firm, never moved offshore to shave a few dollars off the price. It kept doing one thing, the thing Ernest started with, and it kept doing it in the same town. Rockford never fully recovered the manufacturing base it had before the offshoring decades, and the factories that left did not come back, but the hammer plant stayed and kept several hundred people employed, making something with their hands. In 2005, an Estwing hammer was added to the Industry and Manufacturing collection at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, which is an unusual place for a working hand tool to land. It earned its spot not as an antique, but as an example of American manufacturing that had stayed both American and manufacturing for the better part of a century. The hammer in the case is the same hammer for sale at the hardware store, which is most of the point. In 2023, Estwing marked 100 years in business, all of it in Rockford, all of it making the same one-piece tool. The company is still privately held and still run as a family business, the way it has been since Ernest opened the doors. It employs somewhere between 250 and 300 people, depending on demand, in a city that lost most of its other factories. The steel still comes from an American mill. The hammers are still forged, heat-treated, ground, and gripped in Rockford. The leather grips are still stacked and riveted by hand. The design on the floor is still the design in the 1924 patent. A century after a Swedish immigrant decided a hammer should be one piece of steel instead of two pieces fighting each other, the tool he drew is still the standard. It still cannot come apart because there is nothing in it to come apart. It is still forged from a single bar in Rockford, Illinois. It is still gripped by hand, still guaranteed for life, and still hanging from the belts of the professionals who know the difference. Neil Armstrong carried one in the desert while he trained to leave the planet. A version of the same tool sits in the Smithsonian, and another version, identical in every way that counts, is on a workbench in somebody's garage right now, waiting for the next nail. Ernest Estwing set out to build the finest hand tool the world had ever seen, out of one bar of steel, in a basement, with night school English and a machinist's hands. 100 years later, the company still has not found a reason to change his answer. If you made it this far, you already know whether this channel is for you. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. And if you want more stories like Estwing's, the 2 videos on your screen right now are where I would send you next. Click either one and keep going.